This week on Monday, I went to Chatham Church to do a Bible study with someone, and just before I pulled in a car park, I had my headphones close to me, so I put them. Well, I had them in my ears. I put them in the case, and I said, "Well, I'm not gonna take it." And I just put it, above the mirror, in whatever it's called, in the car. Yeah. Now, um, as I was saying, I was just turning in the car park. I saw the lady who was waiting for me to do the Bible study. She was already waiting outside the door. So, I started panicking a bit. I was only a minute late, but nevertheless, I was late. So I parked my car. I started thinking about paying for the car park and where are the keys and so on. So I got out of the car and I realized that I don't know where the headphones are. So I looked on my seat, they were not there. I looked on the passenger seat, they were not there. I looked in every single corner and compartment of the car, and they were not there. I panicked a little bit. I came out of the car, I paid for parking, I opened the door of the church, I invited the lady in, and I said, please allow me just one more minute to go back to the car to look for my headphones. I went back in the car and I looked in the same places where I looked before. I even looked under the car. I thought maybe they fell out when I came out of the car and I needed to find them. But I didn't. So that's when I panicked even more. Now, obviously, the lady was waiting for me. So I went and I did my Bible study. And after we finished, you know what? I started crying because I really thought I lost my headphones. I even called my wife and I told her that I lost the headphones. Look, I even feel like crying now. Probably, yeah. And then I went in the car. And as I left the car park, I looked up and I saw the headphones. Do you ever have this experience of going upstairs to get something and you forget why you went there for? You go out and you realize you've left your wallet inside and you go back and again you don't know why you went back in for. Even when my wife tells me to do 2 or 3 things, I tell her, please understand, first of all, I'm a man. Okay, you don't give men more than one instruction at a time. Yeah, because sometimes she will send me upstairs to get 2 things, and 10 minutes later she will call me, but what happened? Why are you still upstairs? Because I go upstairs and I forget about both things that she asked me to bring. We have this tendency as human beings, to go through a door and forget, and it's called the doorway effect. Where you go for something, but then you get distracted, you lose focus, and you forget what your purpose is. You forget what you are there for. And if you think that forgetting where you've put your headphones a minute earlier, or if going through the door or upstairs and forgetting what you went there for is bad, let me tell you that today we will look at a story where we see some people receiving instructions, precise, clear instructions about what they are to do when they go to war. And as soon as they get in battle, they forget what they were told to do. And it gets even worse because it was God himself who came and gave them those instructions. And when they got into battle and they won the battle, and they heard the sheep bleating, the enemy's sheep, they thought, well, why should we kill the sheep? Let's bring them back and just tell the Lord we brought them over to bring a sacrifice. That's worse. That's a lot worse. And what's worse is when even their leader, King Saul, forgot the instructions that God gave him. They went through the doorway effect as well. But let's first start with the context. The context of the story. I will start with the main character, I would say, which is Samuel. Now we know Samuel, the little boy who his mom prayed because she was barren, she couldn't have children. She went to the temple, she prayed, and she prayed so much and so hard and so passionately that the priest thought she was drunk. And then God blessed her with a child. And she said, well, because God blessed me with a child, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring and dedicate my child for service in the temple. And Samuel is there serving at the temple. And one night the voice of God comes calling Samuel. And Samuel goes and answers. And Samuel ends up being the judge of Israel. You see, Samuel is just like Jesus. We tend to focus on the story when he's a baby, when he's a child, But no, Samuel grew up as well. And he was a judge. He was ruling over Israel, instructing Israel in the way they should act, in what they should do, as God was telling Samuel. But the problem is, Samuel is no longer a child, he's a judge, but there is the other reality of life that we have to accept, and that is that Samuel gets old. And as Samuel gets old, the people of Israel start thinking that a replacement will be needed. And they start discussing who will replace him. Now, the natural order would have been for Samuel's sons to become the judges in his place. And while they were waiting for their dad to pass on and for their opportunity to come, we read that his sons weren't really the best of leaders. Because in 1 Samuel 8, verse 3, we read about them that they were dishonest, they took bribes, and they perverted justice. And they had minor roles as judges over two of the tribes, Simeon and Judah. But they were corrupt. They were not going to represent God in the same way Samuel did. Sometimes, just a side note, sometimes no matter how much effort you put into bringing your children up the right way, no matter how many instructions you give them, no matter how inspiring your personal example is, they will make their choices which will disappoint you. Sometimes they will go against everything that you expect of them and everything that you think God expects of them. And you keep praying for them. And you keep hoping that the instructions, the foundation that you've laid before them will help them. But here we see that Samuel's children, they're struggling. They're struggling really badly. So as I mentioned, because of Samuel's old age, the question of succession came up, and the elders of Israel gathered together to discuss what will happen next. And they even approached Samuel with their conclusion. 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 4 and 5. It says, then the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. And Samuel was displeased with this request. He didn't like what they said to him. So he approached the Lord in prayer. But before we go to the fact that Samuel approached the Lord in prayer, I want to make sure that we understand what is actually going on here. As we said during Sabbath school, try to put yourself in the shoes of the characters you're talking about. Try to put yourself in the shoes of Samuel. When they come to him and they say, well, you're old. Your children do not follow in the ways of the Lord. We want a king like all the other nations. What does Samuel actually hear? Well, first of all, he hears that he's old. And not only that he's old, but that he's going to die. And they will need a replacement. Well, this is, we all know we're getting old, but it's not something that we like talking about. We come to our 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and we still want people to see us as the 20-year-old that we once were. It's difficult to accept that we are old. So it's even more difficult to accept that others see that we are getting older. I'm sure you've all to deal with relatives who were sick and who were elderly and who wanted to carry on being independent. You know, who were stubborn to be on their feet even when they weren't really, it wasn't really recommended for them to be on their feet. Those who were suffering in silence, but they didn't want others to see their silence. Because it's difficult to acknowledge the fact that we are getting older. And it's even more difficult to acknowledge the fact and accept it that one day, our history as we know it here in this life might end. This is not a funeral sermon, but it's a reality of life, a reality that we often avoid. And that's why I meet so many people who refuse to have a will done during their lifetime, because having a will is somehow admitting to the fact that I'm going to die. And I can't tell you the number of conflicts I had to deal with after people passed away without a will, because family members came to share the inheritance. I mean, conflicts arise when there is a will, let alone when there is no will. So Samuel is told, old man, you're not going to be judge over us forever. You're going to die. And we need to know what's going on. The second thing that Samuel hears when the elders of Israel approach him is that, well, his children are not the best people to replace him. You see, children are a very sensible topic, because good or bad, they are our children. And we don't like other people coming to point out the negative traits in our children. You know, and rightly so, because at the end of the day, you know how many sleepless nights you've had to go through. You know how much you had to sacrifice to bring your children up. You know how difficult it was, and how much you prayed, and how much you cried, and how much you struggled to bring your children up. And then somebody comes off the street, and maybe they've seen your children a few times, you know, and they come and say, well, your children are not good enough. You know, this week, my son has tonsillitis, and he's been crying for about 5 nights now. He sleeps for an hour or two because he's too tired, and then he wakes up and he doesn't sleep for 4 or 5 hours. And halfway through the night, he says, Mommy, Daddy, please help me to be better. And you can't do anything. But you know, how many people would know the struggle that a parent goes through? And that's why when the elders come to Samuel and they say, well, Samuel, you know what, your children, they're not good. And not only that, but the way they approach Samuel, they're not only saying that they're not good, but also they're saying that there is no hope for them. There is no way they can get better. There is no way that they will mature overnight. There is no hope that they will be good leaders. They come and say, Samuel, your children are bad. You've done a bad job, and they are hopeless. Not even God can bring them back on the right track, on the right path. So that was hurtful for Samuel. And then the third thing that Samuel hears is that they want a king. They don't want a judge anymore. Now they want a king like all the other nations had. In other words, they want to replicate the model of leadership of other nations. Hello. And in other nations, people didn't have God. So the king was the God. The king was the supreme leader and the final authority. So Samuel is thinking, well, now by rejecting me and wanting a king, they're not only rejecting a man who would be their leader, they're also rejecting God as their leader. And Samuel, as many of us would do, is wondering, is it my fault? Am I to blame for people rejecting God? Because I was the one who was representing God before these people. So are they actually saying, Samuel, you were a bad example, and we don't think God is really doing what he's doing because we haven't seen it with you? And we feel guilty often. Maybe my family, maybe my friends, maybe the people I interact with, maybe they reject God because of something that I did. Maybe it's my bad example. Maybe it's something to do with me. So Samuel was really struggling in that moment. He was told he's old, that his children are bad and there's no hope for them, and that people reject God, possibly because of him. And our normal reaction, if we were faced with such a situation, what do you think would be? I can imagine a few reactions. Having an argument with them, cussing and pointing all sorts of fingers at them. Saying you're saying I'm bad. You're saying I'm old. Look at yourselves. You're rejecting God. If it wasn't for God, you wouldn't be here. But Samuel prays. He goes to the Lord and prays. And what's even more surprising in this story is that God is not surprised. Samuel was shocked. Samuel was confused. He was discouraged. And he goes to God thinking that maybe God will be the same way. But God knew what he was dealing with, or who he was dealing with. 1 Samuel 8, verses 7 and 8. God expresses his frustration with them that he held for many generations. And the Lord said to Samuel, heed the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them out of Egypt, even to this day, which they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they are doing to you also. God, why are you not bringing fire and brimstone over them? If you know they reject you, just destroy them. It's simple. You've been patient with them so far. Now maybe it's time to take some action. But instead, God acts differently. But it's important to dwell on this thought that when Samuel was going through trouble, when he was confused, frustrated, when he didn't know what to do, instead of getting into a conflict or trying to fight it, he takes it to the Lord in prayer. Samuel didn't forget that his calling to be a judge was not from the elders of Israel. The elders might have come to say, okay, Samuel, you're not going to be the judge over us forever. We want a king. And he doesn't recognize their authority because it was God who called him to be the judge. He didn't forget that his greatest responsibility was not before the elders. He didn't forget that, it was not the elders of Israel or even Israel as a whole who make the decision about his life or the way the world works. He didn't forget that it wasn't the elders of Israel who had the power to change characters and the course of nature and the laws of this earth. He didn't forget that no matter what we think as human beings, the greatest authority in the land, the greatest power in the land, the greatest opinion in the land is the Lord's. So instead of reacting how we would usually react with our human instinct, he takes it to the Lord in prayer. And we have a beautiful song, a beautiful hymn that speaks about just that. What a friend we have in Jesus. All our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear. Oh, because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. Have we trials and temptations? Is there trouble anywhere? We should never be discouraged. Take it to the Lord in prayer. And so it goes on. And Samuel knew just that. Is there trouble in your life? Is there confusion in your life? Do you feel surrounded and threatened? Do you feel like you don't know what's going on and you need a solution? Before you think of a solution yourself and before you act, take it to the Lord in prayer, because He will already know what's going on. He will already know who is involved in a certain situation, and He will already have a solution ready. Don't fight your battles alone. Samuel didn't, and God was with him. But now we come to the second part of the story, the one which was connected to our scripture reading. Because to Samuel's surprise, God didn't say no to the idea of Israel having a king. He was ready to grant them this wish. But He didn't grant them this wish before warning them what having a king actually entails, what it will mean for them. You know, having a judge meant that God is the supreme leader, and the judge will simply communicate messages to them. But having a king with greater authority will bring a lot of trouble for them. And they still accepted the risk and wanted to go for it. 1 Samuel 8, verses 19 and 20 reads, "Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, 'No, but we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles.'" Now, please note the role that the king was supposed to have. So to judge over them, which Samuel was already doing and all the judges before them, but also to go out before us and fight our battles. Okay? Make a note of that. Make a mental note of that. Because King Saul is appointed to be the first king over Israel. You know, he's anointed and he's given responsibility from God to be king and judge over the land, with the caveat that he is to understand that he hasn't taken God's place. He's just been appointed to be a different kind of leader, but God is still God. God was going to continue to send messages to Saul, not directly, again through the judge Samuel or through prophets. So God was still in charge, but Saul was given a little bit more authority. And what he gets in 1 Samuel 12, verses 24 and 25, the message from the Lord is, "Only fear the Lord and serve Him in truth with all your heart. For consider what great things He has done for you. But if you still do wickedly, you shall be swept away, both you and your king." So Israel gets the message. You know what? I'm going to grant you the wish. It's okay. I'm not happy about it, but I will give you a king. But don't forget where you've come from and who is having the supreme authority over you. Because if you do, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. And Saul, as the king, he goes on to have some victories in battles, and he's doing okay-ish as a leader. But then quickly he starts making mistakes. The first one in 1 Samuel 13, he's actually rebuked by Samuel, and he's told that God is looking for another king already because Saul has not kept the commandment of the Lord. And now, verse 14 in 1 Samuel 13 says that God was looking for a man after his own heart and has commanded him to be commander over his people because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. You know, it didn't take long for Saul to forget the relationship he was supposed to have with the people and with God. And the Lord rebukes him. And one would think that when you get such a message as a king, you know, the prophet of the Lord coming to you and saying, well, I'm sorry, but God looked at you and you have not kept his commandment. You have not kept your side of the bargain, and he's looking for a replacement. What would be your first thought? Well, Give me another chance. Let me make right with God, and I'll behave differently from now on. I'll do things right. But no, it only lasts for 2 chapters, between chapter 13 and 15, because in chapter 15 we have Samuel being sent to Saul with a special message and mission. Samuel also said to Saul, "The Lord sent me to anoint you king," from verse 1, "to anoint you king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore heed the voice of the words of the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel, how he ambushed him on the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, infant and nursing child, ox and sheep, camel and donkey." So let's make the connections again. What was the role of King Saul? To rule, to judge, and to fight battles, to go before them and fight the battle as the Lord instructed. And now the Lord sends Saul to settle a dispute that started many centuries before. You see, when the Israelites were on their way from Egypt to the promised land, Amalek caused some trouble. So now the accounts are going to be settled. And they're going to be settled in not a very nice way, but a message will be sent. And Saul was supposed to do just that. Go there and it's hard to read, but kill both man and woman, infant and nursing child, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. Now make another mental note of this. 210,000 soldiers were gathered for this war against Amalek. Israel went to fight, and nothing stood before them. Because, if God chooses you, and if God calls you for something, victory is assured. God called Moses to take his people out of Egypt. And no matter what was before them, whether it was the Red Sea or whether it was the desert, the Egyptian armies, it didn't matter. The victory was theirs. Imagine how crazy it was to circle the walls of a city for 7 days. For those who watch VeggieTales for children, there is the story where the people inside Jericho, they come and say, maybe the heat affected you, thinking that you can walk around the city and the city will fall to its knees. It doesn't make sense. Look, we fight. We go out to war. But you know what? The walls came tumbling down. Then Gideon was called by God to liberate Israel and fight the Midianites and the Amalekites. And the people gathered together, and he managed to raise an army of 32,000 people. But God said that 32,000 is too much. And in the end, he went to war with 300 people. And he went to fight against an army, which Judges chapter 7, verse 12 says, was as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number, as the sand by the seashore in multitude. But they still won the battle. Because when God calls you for a mission, when he calls you and appoints you to fulfill a role, it's not your money or your age or your size or your strategy that will give you victory. You just have to walk into the battle, and you will see the walls collapsing. You will see the enemies falling down. The victory is yours. Elijah was called by God to deliver a terrible message to King Ahab. And as soon as he delivered the message, he knew bad things could happen to him. And he has to run away. But God had prepared a place for him. And he fed Elijah. And there was fresh water by his resting place. When God calls you and has a mission for you, he already prepared all the resources you need, as long as you obey the Lord and do what he says. And God still calls us, whoever we are and whatever stage we are in our life journey. You know, I could even go as far as saying that the Lord wanted you to be here this morning for a purpose. I don't know it. I can't see those things. And maybe you don't see it right now. But he has brought you here today, whether in person or on Zoom, for a reason. Because he has a purpose for you. You just have to open your eyes, your ears, your mind, your heart, to allow him to speak to you. Whoever you are, whatever your story is. Because victory is ours as well. And as long as we obey the command of God and don't forget what we've been called to do, we will get to see how the victory unfolds. But sadly, the story of Saul tells us in 1 Samuel 15 that Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep, the oxen, the fatlings, the lambs, and all that was good, and were unwilling to utterly destroy them. But everything despised and worthless, that they utterly destroyed. What did God tell them to do? Go to battle, you will win the war, but after that, you have to wipe off the face of the earth everything. But they thought, well, no, the sheep, they're so fluffy and white. The oxen, they seem so fat. Why would we destroy them? If something looks pale and poorly and not really desirable, we'll get rid of it. That's fine. But the Lord, even the beautiful things, can't really get rid of everything. But that was not what the Lord commanded them to do. And Saul, as the king, was supposed to say, I'm really sorry, but the Lord said no. And instead of doing that, they come back with all those sheep and oxen and animals. And now comes, the funny part of the story, because they experienced the doorway effect. They went to battle and they forgot what they were supposed to do in battle. But now in 1 Samuel 15, verses 12 to 16, Samuel comes to Saul. Obviously, the Lord revealed to Samuel what has happened. So Samuel comes and he pretends not to really have a lot of knowledge, and he rose early in the morning to meet Saul, and it was told Samuel saying, Saul went to Carmel, and indeed he set up a monument for himself, and he has gone on a round, passed by, and gone down to Gilgal. So Samuel goes to Saul, and Saul said to him, "Oh, blessed are you of the Lord. I have performed the commandment of the Lord." Talk about doorway effect. This is beyond that. It's okay to forget and then come and say, oh, the Lord said something different. But he comes and he says, "Oh, Samuel, how blessed are you of the Lord. I have done everything that the Lord commanded." And Samuel, there's a lot of sarcasm in the Bible. If you read carefully, there's a lot of sarcasm and irony. Because Samuel says, "Oh, what then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears and the lowing of the oxen which I hear?" Okay, so I'm happy that you did all that the Lord has commanded you, but I can hear some sheep, and I don't think they were here before. Where did you get them from? And Saul said, careful, they have brought them from the Amalekites. For the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed. Who is to blame? They. I have done everything that the Lord commanded. But they decided to bring some animals over. But don't worry, the reason why I didn't fight with them is because they told me that they are going to bring them to offer them as sacrifice for the Lord. For those of you who keep up with the news, it was just cake. I was ambushed with cake. It was them. I did everything that I was supposed to do. And I really like how Samuel deals with this conversation. And I didn't read the whole of verse 16 because this first part is just amazing. Then Samuel said to Saul, "Be quiet. Don't waste your breath. Don't try." And if you read the rest of the chapter, you will see that Saul, in the end, admits that he was afraid of the people, and that's why he didn't say anything when they decided to do that. He was more afraid of the people than he was afraid of the God who put him in his position in the first place. God appointed him king with a mission and a purpose. God sent him to war with a mission and a purpose. But because he was afraid of the people that he was king over, he forgot his mission and his purpose and blatantly ignored God and his mission and his purpose. So Samuel, all he could say is, "Saul, be quiet. Don't bother." Now losing focus, Saul losing focus, made the whole nation to lose focus as well. And Saul was more or less like Adam and Eve in the garden when they said, "Oh, no, we were naked and ashamed, and that's why we didn't come out when you were looking for us." Saul is pretending like nothing happened. As we would say today, he was playing it cool, hoping that it will be all right. Samuel will be pleased, the Lord will be pleased, an offering will be brought, and everyone will be happy. But let me tell you something, and this will be my final thought. The Lord knows your excuses, and he knows what is beyond our excuses. And that's why honesty is the best policy with God, because only when we are honest with him, that's when he can start working with us and through us. When we pretend that we've done everything all right, when we pretend that everything is okay, and Lord, I've done everything that you have asked of me. When I look at other people and I see other people doing worse things than me, and I come to the Lord and say, "Lord, you know what? You'll have to forgive me because other people, they're worse than me. So I'm good in comparison with them." That's when God can't work with us, because he needs us to be honest and open with him. God has called you and every single one of us for something special. Whoever we are, we have to get on our knees and pray just like Samuel did. We have to then get up and ask God what he wants us to do, because he will give us everything that we need, and he will make us into who he wants us to be. And the most important thing is that Jesus will call your name and my name when he comes to take us into his kingdom. When he comes to call all the saved ones, all those who have given their life to him, we will hear our name being called. Whether we are in a grave or whether we are still alive, we'll be called to go home. If the Lord has called you, and he has called you, and he has a purpose and a mission for your life, make sure you listen. May God bless us all. Amen.